Today's episode of What's Going On with Shipping is Shipping Safer. I'm your host, Sal Mercogliano. Welcome to today's episode. So, is shipping safer? Well, I gotta say, if you've watched any episode of What's Going On with Shipping, especially over the last couple of years, you would probably say no. I mean, this channel started with Ever Given grounding in the Suez back in March of 2021. And what we've seen happening here over the past year has been a lot of high visibility accidents. Just the other day, we had a Canadian Laker have to basically limp its way into Thunder Bay in Canada. We had MSC Michigan 7 out of control with a stuck throttle zooming out of the port of Charleston. We had the APL Qingdao lose propulsion, leaving Staten Island in the Kills, heading into lower New York Bay. We, of course, had the Dolly and its accident, taking out the Francis Scott Key Bridge, killing 6 people in Baltimore. We had a collision between the Verity and the Pulse in the North Sea. We had the dramatic fire on board the Grand Costa d'Avorio in Newark that led to the death of 2 Newark firefighters. We've had a series of car carrier fires, including the Fremantle Highway. We've had vessels coming ashore, grounding in and around the Great Lakes and the St. Lawrence Seaway. From the Dark Fleet, the Shadow Fleet, we've seen a lot of accidents, including the dramatic explosion on board the tanker Pablo. And then we had dam barges up and down the Ohio River and Mississippi. So I think it's very easy to sit there and say, well, man, it looks like it's very unsafe. And there are times I do feel like Jim Cantore on the Weather Channel chasing after storms. It's not what I ever meant to do with this channel. It's just there's a lot of dramatic events that do happen that we cover. But in truth, one of the things that we find out is that the safety and track record of shipping is actually pretty good. And we're going to look at that. Allianz has published their latest report, their safety and shipping review for 2024. We've reviewed previous editions of this. We're going to take a look at this and really take a quantitative examination of, is shipping safer than it has been in the past? If you're new to the channel, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come out. I'll have the link to the full report so that you can download it and take a look at it. We're going to be examining largely the information provided in the executive summary along with some charts and graphs to give you the overall picture, but this is from the introduction of the report. Annual shipping losses have declined by 70% over the past decade, demonstrating the significant improvements made in maritime safety. However, the speed and extent of the way the industry's risk profile is changing is unprecedented in modern times. Conflicts such as Gaza and Ukraine are reshaping global shipping, impacting crew and vessel safety, supply chains, and infrastructure, and even the environment. Piracy is on the rise with a worrying reemergence off the Horn of Africa. The ongoing distribution caused by the drought in the Panama Canal shows how the changing climate is affecting shipping. Meanwhile, the trend for larger ships and the changing nature of their cargoes continue to pose safety questions, all at a time when shipping is having to undertake its most significant challenge, decarbonization. All right, let's go ahead and get into some of the data here. So, given as much as 90% of international trade is transported across oceans, maritime safety is critical. And the industry has made significant increases over the years. In the 1990s, the global fleet lost on average 200 plus ships a year. As you note in this chart here, only 26 ships were total losses in 2023. And if you go back the past decade, now these are vessels over 100 gross tons, total losses between 2014 and 2023 are 729. And you can see where those losses took place for last year and also in previous years. That reduction has been pronounced. We're seeing a 70% decline over the past decade. Go back to 2015 and you see 105 ships lost. Now we're down to 26. The database shows that of 26 total losses at the end of 2023, that is a marked reduction compared to 41 a year earlier and 89 10 years previously. South China, Indonesia, Indochina, and the Philippines is the main loss hotspot, both over the past year and the past decade. Eastern Med and Black Sea ranks as the second top loss region, with activity up year on year, not surprising based on what has been happening between Russia and Ukraine. If you look at the larger macro out 10 years, we've seen 729 ships lost during that period. This represents a significant improvement on annual loss average over this period. It's even more impressive given the fact that there are over 100,000 ships in the global fleet. These are over 100 gross tons. That's compared to 80,000 just 30 years ago. The largest area of the sea loss is in the South China Sea region with 184 ships, Eastern Mediterranean Black Sea with 115, and then Western Pacific, Japan, Korea, North China. Those three areas represent 50% of all loss activity over the past decade. If you start breaking this down by types of vessels, what we see is cargo fishing and passenger vessels account for over 60% of ship losses over the past decade, and you can see that graphically put out there with a light blue line being cargo, followed by fisheries, then tugs, passenger, and bulk carriers. If we break it down just for last year, calendar year, we're seeing 16 cargo vessels were lost, 4 fishing vessels, 3 tugs, a chemical product tanker, a container ship, and 1 passenger vessel. If we go for causes over the past decade, the leading cause for vessels is foundering, sinking. That's 52% of vessels. Wrecked and stranded or grounded is 17%. Fire and explosions, 14%. Those top three give you 85% of all ship losses. Collisions, machinery damage, failures, and undetermined causes really make up the remaining 15%. And if you look over the last year in particular, we had 13 ships that sank or foundered, 4 that were wrecked or stranded or grounded, 3 suffered fires and explosions, 2 collisions, 2 hull damages, and then 2 with machinery damage. The Allianz report breaks this down even in more detail, so I will again have the link available for you so you can kind of dig into that report. However, it does make a look at trends and what to be looking for on the horizon. One of the big trends and outlooks has to be the vulnerability of global shipping to proxy wars. With more than 100 ships so far targeted in and around the Red Sea. And one of the biggest concerns that the report notes has to do with the well-being and safety of seafarers. We've seen numerous attacks on vessels, 1 ship sunk. We've seen 1 ship severely damaged with the loss of crew members on board. That was a True Confidence with the loss of 3 people. Ruby-Max was the ship that was sunk. And we're seeing a recent ratchet up in the number of attacks by the Houthis against unarmed vessels. And we're seeing the militaries kind of backing away a little bit in their policy of defense against this. Add to this the war in Ukraine alongside what's happening in and around the Red Sea are having a major impact. This is impacting trade heading through the Suez Canal. We have major water issues in the Panama Canal. Just now starting to see the rise in water levels in the Panama Canal, hopefully seeing a resumption back to full passage through the canal in terms of numbers of ships and drafts through the Neo-Panamax lane. But supply chains and companies are much more interconnected than in the past. And so this is all having a major impact. And as we start heading into winter down in the southern hemisphere, storms, rough seas, slow steaming are really going to be impacting ships that have to divert around the Cape of Good Hope, southern Africa, heading toward Europe and America. We're also seeing an uptick in piracy. There are 120 reported incidents against ships globally in 2023, up on 2022. This comes from the International Maritime Bureau, their live piracy map showing you the number of attacks in and around the world for 2024. You can see attacks off the west coast of Africa, but most importantly, what we're seeing right now is that spike in and around East Africa, off the southeastern tip of the Arabian Peninsula, in the Indian Ocean, the Arabian Sea area. We're seeing a gradually tightening of international sanctions of Russian oil and gas exports, with estimates having a dark fleet or parallel fleet of Russian vessels with 600 to 1,400 tankers moving oil around the world outside the purview of the main P&I, Protection and Indemnity Club insurances, and even flags of registry. There's an uptick in cargo theft in North America. The number of theft claims has increased over the past 6 years in a row, with a 20% increase year on year in 2022. The final total for 2023 is likely to surpass this. We're also seeing use of organized methods to gain access to cargo, GPS tracking, looting, just a large number of events. And then you have the tragic collapse of the Baltimore's Francis Scott Key Bridge. There were just 35 major bridge collapses worldwide involving ships or barges between 1960 and 2015. But with the growth of the size of vessels, the velocity increasing in the movement of cargo, the volume increasing in that cargo, larger vessels are using infrastructure that were designed for much smaller vessels. The Baltimore Bridge incident also put the potential risk of power blackouts, loss of propulsion out there, as it is not a common occurrence. According to analysis of incident reports, more than 400 cargo ships have reported losing power over the past 3 years in U.S. waters. And perhaps the greatest threat looming out there, and the one that we're seeing a bit of an uptick in, has to be in the area of fires at sea. This report coming out from Sea Trade Maritime, the rising concern over fire safety on board ships. UK-based Servitec, a safety and survival company, has pointed to what it describes as an alarming increase in faulty firefighting equipment found on ships during port state control inspections. In a white paper released at Poseidonia in Athens earlier this week, Servitec pointed out that the fires continue to be the most expensive cause of marine insurance claims and accounts for more than 20% of total losses. This actually matches up when we looked at the inspections done on board MSC Michigan 7, the vessel that suffered the throttle incident coming out of Charleston. One of the things that it was continually ticked on was about its fire and life safety equipment. Lastly, while shipping has been making progress toward decarbonization, ambitious new industry targets and regulatory developments signal the need for greater urgency. Targets include a 40% reduction in CO2 emissions by 2030 and to cut total annual greenhouse gases emissions from international shipping by at least 20% by 2030 and by at least 70% by 2040. IMO 2050 that came out was agreed to cut carbon emissions by 50% based on 2008 limits. However, there's been a real big push to increase that limit, but there is problems with that, whether or not that is an achievable goal. And now with ships taking longer sea routes due to the Houthis around Africa and the problem in replacing vessels and coming up with alternative suitable fuels, decarbonization is presenting a series of challenges. This is being saddled by the ocean shipping companies, the shipyards, to come up with new propulsion means. And that means that cost is being pushed down the supply chain ladder to consumers who are paying more. Increasing shipyard capacity will be key to demand for green ship acceleration. Over 3,500 ships must be built or refitted annually until 2050. Shipbuilding industry is on a decline, built 2,700 vessels at its peak in 2010. The number of shipyards have more than halved between 2007 and 2022. We've seen an increase in the time it takes to order new ships and the increased cost in vessels. So overall, we have seen that reduction, that great graph you saw at the very beginning, where from a decade ago, we are losing less ships at sea. However, the incidents that are happening are major incidents, and we're seeing a lot of them. And I think it has to do, again, with the volume and velocity of cargo. We've increased the volume of cargo that moves around the world's oceans. And when you increase that volume and the velocity, the amount you have to move the cargo, that means that the potential for danger increases. Are ships getting enough maintenance? Are the crews getting enough downtime? Are we giving the shipping companies and the crew members on board the time to do all the material checks that they are required for? That is a big question, and I think we're going to need to see if this trend continues or if we start seeing an uptick. If the uptick starts happening in these reports, then we need to take a step back, look, and what are we doing to improve safety and life at sea. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come out. Leave a comment, share it across social media, and if you can, support the page. How do you do it? Hit that super thanks button down below, or head on over to Patreon and become a monthly or yearly subscriber. Until the next video, Sal, signing off.